I am Sharad Soni, a professor and a chairperson at the Center for Inner Asian Studies of a School of International Studies in Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi. For the last 2 decades, I have been teaching and doing research on various issues concerning Inner Asian and Eurasian studies. Since I am going to speak now on India and Inner Asia in terms of their reconnections, I think I should start with highlighting briefly what Inner Asia means to India. In fact, Inner Asia suddenly came into light, after Prime Minister Narendra Modi came into power in 2015 as his first term. And with him in power, India's foreign policy began to revamp. Smaller countries in Asia too came into prominence so far as India's foreign policy is concerned. In this vein, the 2015 visit of Prime Minister Modi to Mongolia, and in the same year, I would rather say in the next month, in July 2015, to Central Asian republics, all the Central Asian republics in one single trip, forms a part of, India's engagement with these Inner Asian region, or we can also, term them in terms of extended neighborhood. Modi's visit to these places, became all the more important given that importance of both Mongolia and Central Asia to India today not just remains a civilizational, but geostrategic and geocultural too. India thus seems to be trying to build up its strategic role in both Mongolia and Central Asia as a neighbor, a regional power and a global actor in the face of China's economic preeminence and Russia's geopolitical interest. Such importance of Inner Asian region points to the fact that this region is not just an hinterland to Russia and China, but itself constitutes a sphere, a center which has its particular historical dynamics in terms of its geocultural setting. Having been united by ways of life such as nomadic pastoralism and trade, and by many common aspects of culture, Inner Asia has had its own languages, scripts, as well as religious and political traditions. And from time immemorial, the region has served as a generator of population movements within the Eurasian landmass. That is why research on Inner Asia has gained renewed importance in the 21st century, given the fact that more attention now is being given on Asian IR. To use the modern geographical terms, I would say, Mongolia, Inner Mongolia, Tibet, Xinjiang of People's Republic of China, as well as, Buryatia, Kalmykia, and Tuva republics of Russian Federation in Siberia, or what we call Asiatic Russia. These all belong to the Inner Asian region. A historical geographical review of the region suggests that possessing an enormous mass of landlocked grasslands, the Inner Asian steppe made possible the appearance of a unique historical phenomena, that is the horse breeding highly mobile Eurasian nomad. In historical times, these nomads were Turks and Mongols. These peoples had earlier seized primacy from the Indo-Europeans, some of whom they absorbed and some of whom migrated to India, the Middle East, or even Europe. The mountains and rivers of Inner Asia, as the Altai, Tian Shan and Pamis, are the most prominent ranges, but the Kunlun, Karakoram and the Himalayas can also be talked about. We cannot ignore these 3 mountain ranges. The Kunlun, Karakoram and Himalayas, the highest mountain complexes in the world, had allowed trade and religion, especially Buddhism, to flow through their passes between India and Inner Asia. Human migration through Central Asia, on the other hand, turned out to be practicable, and the area became an important, gateway through which in proto-history, or for that matter, antiquity peoples of Inner Asia moved, south to Iran or even India. In the post-Cold War period, or more precisely in the 21st century, the whole Inner Asian region has been experiencing enormous change as the socialism of the mid-20th century has been replaced by the new economic and political processes. As such, a large part of Inner Asia is now no longer peripheral, but intermediate between center of gravity in Russia or China. A case in point here is Mongolia, which is situated at the heart of Inner Asia which has quite for some time now, occupied a significant place in India's foreign policy, both in terms of geopolitics as well as culture that is based on Buddhism. Dealing with the case of Mongolia, I would say, or rather I would like to emphasize, on the geopolitics that the region has experienced and factors that influence India's policy towards this part of Inner Asia. Speaking about geopolitics in Mongolia and India's policy towards Inner Asia as a whole and Mongolia in particular, I would say throughout the 20th century, most of the Inner Asian societies were overshadowed either by their Russian or their Chinese overlords in terms of political powers. Mongolia, which was the key setting for development of several of the Inner Asian polities in the past, has had similar experience. The geopolitical game played by Russia and China in that part of the world is evident from the 1689 Nachin's Treaty, which was a watershed, or rather I would say this was the first treaty which was signed between any Asian and European powers. This treaty, this Nachin's Treaty of 1689, according to this treaty, Buryatia, which is in Russian Federation, in Siberia, it has become part of Russia since 1689. And also this treaty pushed Mongolia to be, become more or less a province of Chinese until 1911, when it proclaimed independence from the Manchu Qing ruler of China. The geopolitical game played by Russia and China basically starts from the 1689 itself. Talking about 1911 revolution, I would say between 1911, when Mongolia proclaimed its independence from the Chinese, until 1921, when Mongolia finally became independent, it was a period of tug of war, between various warlords, within the Mongolian territory, and Mongolia finally got independence in 1921 due to the Soviet Union support. It was in sharp contrast, what we have witnessed in 1911 and what we have witnessed in 1921. 1911, it was said that Russia did not want Mongolia to see as an independent state. But in 1921, when the fall down of Tsarist Russian Empire came, and so Soviet Union took over power, or for that phenomena, I would say, when Soviet Union formation was taken place, then the Soviet Union supported, or Soviet Russia rather, I would say, supported Mongolia in its revolution that is known as the Second Revolution, to become independent, and finally Mongolia became independent. And that point of time it was known as Outer Mongolia to distinguish itself from inner Mongolia, which is still part of China and which is being ruled by China as an autonomous republic. In the post 1921 period, I would say it has opened a new era in the Mongolian history. Basically, Mongolia came to be ruled more or less as a Soviet province from 1921 onwards. It being drawn basically in the Soviet orbit, and ultimately became a major irritant in the Sino-Soviet competition, or rather I would say Sino-Soviet Cold War during the mid 60s, or mid 20th century, if I have to generalize. This whole period was the Sino-Soviet Cold War in this part of the world until 1991, when Soviet Union breakup took place. What one would come across the fact that due to its landlocked geographical location between Russia and China, Mongolia has always been influenced by actions and reactions of its two geographic neighbors, Russia and China, whose great game precisely in Inner Asia, covering most of the Eurasian landmass, put a stumbling block to the growth of meaningful bilateral relations with the outside world, except these two powers, these two neighboring powers, geographic neighbors. And Mongolia basically came under the shadow of the Sino-Soviet Cold War. Under this shadow, Mongolia could feel the extent of its sufferings in terms of its independent existence that resulted willingly or unwillingly into taking side of one of its neighbors, and that neighbor was basically Soviet Union, and that gave a fresh dimension to negotiating Mongolia's independent identity under the impact of geopolitical wranglings. The post-Soviet period, or rather post-Cold War period, I would say, it has been witnessing a new Mongolia, which has its own foreign policy that stresses on maintaining equidistance with its two neighboring powers, two geographic neighbors, Russia and China, and at the same time, pursuing another offshoot of this foreign policy that is known as third neighbor policy, to balance these two geographic neighbors, Russia and China. So this is what Mongolia's foreign policy is all about today. This third neighbor factor is also relevant in India's policy making towards Mongolia. So what are the important factors and that have worked or have been working in India's favor, so far as its outreach to inner Asia is concerned? And number one, I would say India's actist policy. You see, as an emerging power in the wider Asia-Pacific region, or for that matter, Indo-Pacific region, and having an important energy security needs generated by its growing economy, India has expanded the range and scope of its diplomatic outreach in the past few years. While the regions within South Asia, Indian subcontinent, the member of SAARC, South Asian Association for Regional Cooperation, they come within India's neighborhood. The region beyond South Asia that basically represent India's extended neighborhood, and the term extended neighborhood made its entry into India's foreign policy making in the 1990s, following concerns of Indian analysts that India should break out of catastrophic confines of South Asia. There has been no looking back since then, and ultimately trade, transport and connectivity that became India's thrilling words in India's extended foreign policy. This vision of extended neighborhood or India's strategic frontiers, I would say, thus extends to Central Asia in the north, East Asia including Southeast and Northeast Asia in the east, and Persian Gulf region in the west. Central Asia and parts of East Asia are included in inner Asia, and so the Northeast Asia as well. As regards East Asia, since 1993, India's lookist policy was working well, particularly towards Southeast Asia. But Northeast Asia, it was left behind. It was not being focused more as Southeast Asia was being focused at that point of time, and that required Indian policy to cover whole of East Asia. And basically, what happened? This lookist policy, it was changed to actist policy, in November 2014 to give more emphasis on East Asia as a whole and Northeast Asia in particular, I would say. Northeast Asia as a sub-region of East Asia has an enormous geostrategic significance as it is positions at a crucial juncture of energy supply chain, and hence figures prominently in terms of energy cooperation initiatives. Both the energy consuming countries, that is China, Japan and South Korea, and energy supplying countries, that is Russia and Mongolia, make this region an important entity connecting a network of growing supplies and markets. Since Northeast Asia is becoming a major factor in India's strategic vision in the East Asian region, Mongolia too has figured prominently in India's foreign policy as it is closer to Northeast Asian region. Today, Mongolia is an integral part of India's actist policy, and that the destinies of India and Mongolia are closely linked with the future of the Asia-Pacific region, which has been recognized by the Indian policymakers. Or what of late we emphasize more on that for Asia-Pacific region, I would rather say in the Indo-Pacific region. Number two, I would say about the China factor, which has also influenced India's foreign policy making. In recent years, China has been, spending much political energy in cultivating India's neighbors, in the subcontinent and the Indian Ocean. In fact, the 1990s saw China, revamping its foreign policy towards its neighboring countries, through what it calls as its periphery policy or good neighborly policy. Both the non-traditional security paradigms such as economic diplomacy as well as traditional security concerns, form the main guiding principles of China's periphery policy or China's good neighborly policy. Moreover, establishing or maintaining good relationship with neighbors, was intended to provide China with a more secure environment in its periphery as a leverage to increase its influence in the world affairs. By pursuing its periphery policy or good neighborly policy, China tried to make its presence felt in its neighborhood in order to expand its muscles, be it South Asia or East Asia as a whole. Since India too needed to cultivate, good relations in China's backyard, particularly in Inner Asia, or adjoining Inner Asia, which is adjoining Northeast Asia, Mongolia offered a brilliant option. Modi's 2015 visit to Mongolia was influenced by this, in this direction as well. Even Buddhist diplomacy has been cited as the core of Modi's foreign policy, at least towards the neighboring countries as well as in the extended neighborhood where China factor holds its relevance. Several analysts has considers Mongolia's, Modi's visit to Mongolia as part of India's outreach to Inner Asia, aimed more as gaining more psychological leverage over China than about building trade and economic ties. This is more so because, in the post-Soviet period, I would say, China's idea has been to make Mongolia so dependent on it economically that its independence becomes irrelevant. That was major concerns of the Chinese so far as Mongolia is concerned, or China's relations with Mongolia is concerned. This has been also, I would say, a major concerns of Mongolia's 2011 revised foreign policy concept, in which the need to develop closer relations with third neighbors became very relevant. China threat perceptions that also work to its fullest so far as Mongolia's foreign policy is concerned, and that resulted basically in formulating Mongolia's third neighbor policy. In several ways, Mongolia offers a newer opportunities and a strategic leverage for India in dealing with China. In this sense, again I would say Modi's visit to Mongolia in particular and Indian policy towards that part of the world is of geostrategic orientation, influenced by geopolitical as well as geocultural concerns. Now number 3, I would say about Mongolia's third neighbor policy factor. This also factors importantly so far as India's foreign policy is concerned. I would begin with saying that India has occupied an important place in Mongolia's foreign policy. In its revised foreign policy, as I said earlier, Mongolia, revised foreign policy which was re-adopted, I would say, because it was originally adopted in 1994 and then it was revised in 2011. In this foreign policy, particularly third neighbor policy was focused. For the first time, India was elevated as Mongolia's third neighbor, in addition to others like USA, Germany, Japan, South Korea, Turkey, Canada, and Australia. So for India, it was a major concern that Mongolia gives preference to India as its third neighbor. It was a major thing, so far as their bilateral relations are concerned. The third neighbor policy is basically driven by Mongolia's geopolitical, geoeconomic and geostrategic concerns, which have made this less populated country, which has only 3.2 million population, an important entity both within and outside. This policy is also, derived by both the historical cultural ties as well as friendliness with other countries, which are often based on shared values, common interest, or even simply societal sympathy. More or less, all these third neighbor countries, they are all democratic countries. You name it and you will find. Mongolia is very clear that its identified third neighbors are geographically distant and hence do not present the same risk that its geographical neighbors do in terms of dominance. So Mongolia has fear from both the Russians as well as Chinese for dominance, and they have been dominating economically. If I say the one is largest trading partner, that is China, the largest investor, that is China, and the second largest trading partner is Russia. So both are economically dominating in Mongolia. What is new today, I would say, in India's position in Mongolia's diplomacy of external relations is that it is being perceived as its third neighbor in both regional and international context, particularly in the context of India's role in promoting a multipolar security structure in Asia. This is in sharp contrast to ordinary viewpoint that India-Mongolia relations are merely based on age-old cultural linkages, or that cultural linkages which is again based on Buddhist traditions. Yet there are also limits to Indian power play in Mongolia. With just two neighbors with whom Mongolia has had difficult relations in the past, the Ulaanbaatar is the capital of Mongolia, has no interest in provoking either Russia or China by undertaking activities that is hostile to them. Like all small states, or rather I would say like all small, small landlocked states, with large neighbors, Mongolia also wants a measure of strategic, autonomy for them. However, the country carefully calibrates its relationship with other major powers. Since the declaration of India as a third neighbor by Mongolia, Modi's visit is the first high-level visit to this part of the world. And that visit, Modi's visit, was followed by the visit of the Mongolian president Khaltmagin Batulga in September 2019 to India. Until Modi's visit to Mongolia, I would say, the comprehensive partnership developed between the two sides. And that reflected the ways in which the two sides redefined their geostrategic interests. Such interests finally resulted in upgrading their bilateral relationship or comprehensive partnership, I would say, into a strategic partnership while Modi was visiting Mongolia. And about a strategic partnership, I would say there are only 3 third neighbor countries of Mongolia with whom Mongolia has signed a strategic partnership. First, it has signed a strategic partnership with Japan, second with India, and third with United States. So these are the only third neighbors with which Mongolia has a strategic partnership, in addition to a strategic partnership with its 2 immediate neighbors or 2 geographic neighbors, that is Russia and China. This strategic partnership has been an important step towards regional cooperation, given that India's traditional South Asian centric security policies are being stretched out into East Asia and the Pacific, as well as in a northward movement to Central Asia. As a third neighbor, India wants to support Mongolia in whatever ways it is possible. One significant example I will give you, that when Modi visited Mongolia, he announced US $1 billion line of credit for infrastructure development. And this $1 billion line of credit has already been disbursed to Mongolia, as India has been constructing in Mongolia the first oil refinery. So this money which was promised by the Modi is being spent in the development of this oil refinery in Mongolia, which is being constructed and is expected to complete it by 2022. Also, when Mongolian president visited India in September 2019, during that time, so many things was discussed so far as bilateral relations is concerned. And Mongolian, back home in Mongolia, the Mongolians, they asked India to approve, to extend the investment in this oil refinery and give US dollar 236 million also. And India accepted this US dollar 236 million to disperse to Mongolia. So finally, India's commitment, it has reached up to US dollar 1.236 billion. For this project that is constructing oil refinery in Mongolia. After completion, as I said earlier, after completion in 2022, the oil refinery plant will help Mongolia to cut some of its dependence on Russia. Nowadays almost 90% of petroleum products, that is imported by Mongolia from Russia. So it is going to, after completion of this oil refinery, which is being constructed in cooperation with India, that will, it is expected to, fulfill almost 70% of the domestic consumption in Mongolia. So that is very important from both Mongolia's point of view or India's point of view so far as the bilateral relations are going on. Number 4, I would say culture as a factor, basically Buddhism. India became well known in Mongolia, due to the spread of Buddhism. Buddhism is the base of India-Mongolia historical relations. And whenever we talk about relations, Buddhism always comes first. This is being used, as a soft power tool nowadays. Buddhism, both by India as well as Mongolia. I would say, the legacy of traditional relationship, based on Buddhism, that resulted in regular interaction, assimilation and exchanges between these two countries, India and Mongolia, that gave way to the establishment of very close and meaningful relations between the two countries. And this Buddhism, the factor of Buddhism, due to this only, these two countries, India and Mongolia, are now known as spiritual neighbors. Why they are known as spiritual neighbors? Firstly, I would say, India is the birthplace of Buddha. And that provides enough reason for the Buddhist Mongolia to be known as Buddhist Mongolia and India to be known as spiritual neighbors. Secondly, I would say India is adored in Mongolia not only as a land of Buddha or land of Dharma, but also as a country to which the Mongolian people attribute, all that have been considered the highest attainments of wisdom and learning. And lastly, number 3, I would say Mongolian language has traditionally been enriched by a vast terminology and rich phraseology borrowed from Sanskrit. So culture is a very important factor in India-Mongolia relations, or for that matter, India's outreach to inner Asia. So without culture factor, we cannot imagine about the we cannot take into consideration geopolitical and geostrategic factors. Geocultural factors are more important in whenever we talk about India's outreach to inner Asia. The geopolitics and geostrategy, these come second after geocultural factor. Indeed, Mongolia, I would say, offers many possibilities for India's cultural diplomacy, rather I would say Buddhist diplomacy. To a great extent, Buddhism remains at the very forefront of India's new Asian, or for that matter, inner Asian outreach, both culturally as well as diplomatically. Now to conclude, I would say in terms of regional dimension, the inner Asian identity of Mongolia having close proximity with Northeast Asia generate much scope for the expansion and concretization of India-Mongolia relations or cooperation in various sectors. One thing, however, is certain. In India's policy towards Mongolia is that the geopolitical factor, as I said earlier, particularly the China factor. After geocultural factor, this geopolitical factor, that is the China factor, is very important so far as Mongolia-India relations is concerned. And this will continue to remain as an important factor, as Mongolia also does not want to be dominated by China, at least economically. China threat perception is always there in Mongolia, but economic threat is more important in terms of threat. So that is where Mongolia needs India, to have a meaningful economic cooperation with India. And since these two countries are distant neighbors, it's a long route. We have only two routes to reach Mongolia. It is either via Russia or via China. China is difficult in terms of it will be costly affair if you conduct our economic relations through China. So it's always better for India to go to Mongolia directly and invest in Mongolia's infrastructure development, and out of that India can also be benefited. Indian workers can go there, Indian technocrats can go there, Indian businessmen can go there, and they all can contribute to the development of Mongolia's infrastructure and get benefit out of that also. So that is more important. About mining, I would say Mongolia is very rich in mining. The mining boom Mongolia has been experiencing for quite some time now. It will be decisive for Mongolia's economic growth, which further depends on the exploration of 170 billion tons of coal, 205 million tons of petroleum, and 68,000 tons of uranium reserves, where India is very much required. And it is, onus basically lies on India. India has to think how it is going to exploit all these mining resources which Mongolia has in abundance. Who knows, I would say, but future relations between India and Mongolia could well be underpinned by economic cooperation led by the mining industry. And the beginning has already been made. They are encouraging signs that India has already taken initiative to build the world refinery in Mongolia. As regards culture, I have already highlighted that Buddhism in both Mongolia and India's foreign policy perspectives, more as a soft power tool, appear to be beneficial not only in the smooth sailing of relations between the two sides, but also with Russian Buddhist societies or Buddhist republics, rather I would say Buryatia and Tuva at least. So India's outreach will further be enhanced in Asiatic Russia as well, in Siberia as well, where India has already been looking for at least in mining sector, India has been doing a lot, signing cooperation agreement with Russian Far Eastern government, and you see the future will take how much Buddhist factor is going to help India, not only in Mongolia but in Russian Siberia as well, Russian Far East as well. India on its part visualizes a positive role for Mongolia in regional affairs, particularly in Central Asia and Northeast Asia. These two regions are vital when we talk about inner Asian region. Both these regions are vital for India given the fact that New Delhi has been trying to reconnect and become an important player in both the regions. In this respect, Mongolia's role could be important for India considering Mongolia being something of a hinge between the two regions, Central Asia and Northeast Asia. Close cooperation at Regional Security Forum, especially Shanghai Cooperation Organization as well as Ulaanbaatar Forum for Northeast Asian Security Dialogue. It would go a long way in building confidence and mutual understanding on inter-regional cooperation between India and Mongolia. In SCO particularly, Shanghai Cooperation Organization particularly, I would say, apart from Russia and Mongolia, member states of Central Asia will understand India's role as important in maintaining geopolitical balance in the region in the face of Chinese activism. With this, I would end my lecture here. Thank you all.